Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday, and this is going to be another really wonky one. Yes, the title is Gamer the Only Identity That Doesn't Make You Crazy These Days? And this was a way of summarizing a really dense series of thoughts I've been having about trying to solve some of these, not solve, but lessen some of the community challenges we have in the gaming space, in part because I'm working on starting a Discord server for patrons and Song of Sparkle Muffin backers with more people to be added soon, but I want to go slow. But community management's a fascination of mine, and community management is all about understanding how the individual interacts with the group and how the group interacts with the individual. So that's sort of the basis of this video, but it's going to get really, really dense and really, really wonky because this is what I do. This is what I do for fun. Not really. This is more of a professional thing, but if you like these sort of deep dives, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. Okay, so I talk a lot about how I have very weak connections to sort of group identifiers, right? If you ask me what I am, it's like, I'm a gamer. And then everything else is up for debate. Like gamer is one of the few labels I don't have a but next to it. Yeah, I'm a this but. And accordingly, labels make me feel weird. And that's just me. And I am very careful to make sure that my discomfort with being put in boxes like that doesn't make me come across in the wrong way, doesn't make me too cut off from other people who can very simply answer, what are you? I'm this, and this, right? And so I found these psychological principles that sort of help explain the challenge. And I've come to the working theory that we actually do have too much identity going on around, too much obsession with identity going on right now. And instead of getting a nice balance between the two types of thinking about oneself, a phenomenon called self-construal, we're getting all the negatives and not many of the positives. And this is sort of a follow-up from yesterday's video, but it's a much more deep dive into this particular thing as opposed to, parasocial and or simulated interactions, right? So a self-construal is how people view themselves and how they view themselves compared to the rest of the world. And there's two main buckets of self-construal: independent self-construal and interdependent self-construals. And, here in the West, we go, oh, well, being independent's the best, right? And of course, a lot of Asian cultures don't agree. This is why when we get into concepts of agency, especially through a Marxist postmodern lens, analysis of Asian media is no good, very, very, very bad, because agency is seen as the best thing a character can have, and characters without agency are terrible, except when it's The Handmaid's Tale, right? Then it's the point. But, the Asian cultures have a much more, and this is proven, this is not my opinion, this is not me being an ignorant Westerner, this has been measured, that Asian cultures have a much more interdependent definition of the self. And an example of that, a clear example of that, is how in many Asian cultures, the family name comes first and the given name or personal name comes second. putting the family as the primary thing that matters, right? That's one way of looking at it. That is just an example of how it's different, right? Whereas here, there are some people who only have one name, Madonna, Cher, Lady Gaga. I guess that's two names, but people take on pseudonyms and people take on screen names to get this sense of independence and individualization. And that's very, very important. An independent self-construal, the ability to self-construe independently, to see yourself as me instead of we, is very important for avoiding feelings of overwhelming shame, because you're not being a good member of the collective, right? But people who are too independently self-construed, tend to be more prone to the fundamental attribution error logical fallacy. And I found this fascinating. Apparently, Westerners are more prone to fundamental attribution errors than Asian cultures, according to the stuff I've read. And for people who don't know what a fundamental attribution error is, a fundamental attribution error is judging a person's behavior, like attributing it to their character or personality, as opposed to situational factors or factors beyond their control. The For Dummies example is somebody's late for something and somebody, oh, you're lazy or you're inconsiderate, instead of, no, traffic was really bad and I got stuck behind an accident, right? That's a really cut and dried example of a fundamental attribution error. And there's a lot of this going around these days. There's a lot of mind reading, especially on the internet. The fundamental attribution error is basically a lack of benefit of the doubt. And it is a logical fallacy. It actually does result in less good decision making when you mischaracterize why someone did something. Getting that wrong is pretty important, and we see this all over the place. This idea that calling someone out, there are different ways of calling people out, and going, you're a racist, is not as effective as saying to somebody, perhaps, do you understand how people interpret you when you say or do these things? There was a story in the media up here in Canada over the weekend about rural Canadians who are flying the Confederate flag as a sign of rural pride, and are looked at somewhat askance because we didn't have the Confederacy in Canada. That's an American construct. And I may be doing more stuff on that with my New Music Nation stuff. But that's one of those things that, I was impressed by. Of course, they interviewed a bunch of Black people on this, and I was really impressed by people who, pretty much everybody interviewed said they probably just don't understand how it comes across. They probably just don't understand. And we need so much more of that in the world, because when somebody, is don't attribute to malice what can be summed up by ignorance, things seem to move a lot faster. But that's not what we live in. Somebody makes a mistake and it becomes something about their character, instead of it being a lack of understanding or a context shift or something. That's the world we live in. Everybody knows that. And what this is, if you follow self-construal theory, is the worst parts of interdependent self-construal, the shame, the intense anxiety, guilt, and shame, but also the results of an excess of independent self-construal, which is the fundamental attribution error, right? Missing the context, not seeing the forest for the trees. Online culture and greater culture in general, the culture wars, are an excess of both these things. And one could say, well, that's narcissism. But is it narcissism? Because I don't want to make a fundamental attribution error. Is it narcissism, or is it just too much obsession with identity? Is it just too much, what am I? Who am I? How do I relate to the larger world? And this has me very curious, because as somebody who, you guys know, sort of very rarely takes a hard and fast side in culture war factions, I'll either go, well, I'll talk to both sides, or I don't want to be a part of this at all. I won't go, oh, I'm this, or oh, I'm that, right? I think it's partially being Canadian. Canadians aren't, we sort of have an ish identity, we don't have the really, really rampant nationalism that a lot of countries have. And that's not good or bad. It just is, right? We have pluralistic, mosaic multiculturalism, meaning people are more likely to keep their culture than to try to assimilate, to try to act Canadian or talk Canadian, the way Americans are obsessed with, act American, talk American, whatever that means. And of course, it's not true across the board. It's very different in cities than it is rurally. But even, I live on the edge of rural Ontario. And I mean, I'm on a well. We get our water from a well. And it is not nearly as segregated as, say, when I go down to visit my friend in Vermont, or even parts of California, or even, Montana, even, Georgia's very checkerboard. We do not have that intensity of, segregation's a loaded word, but you know what I mean? Like, keep to your own kind. We have a much more elastic idea of we. And I think we also sort of have a more chill form of me, that independent self-construal as well. We're just kind of like, whatever. I mean, when the Raptors are in the playoffs, the whole country comes together because we only have one basketball team. We used to have two, but we only have one now because the Grizzlies moved to crap. I don't remember. But we have this kind of rivalry between like our CFL teams and our hockey teams and stuff like that. But it isn't like the rioting that happens in the US. I mean, you guys saw over the last few weeks the most intense act of, protest / some sort of siege of downtown Ottawa, in the last 50 years. And when you compare it to other things like that around the world, it was pretty chill, right? I mean, people were using some pretty inflammatory language, but nobody died. Fast food restaurants weren't set on fire. There wasn't even rubber bullets. I mean, that tells you a lot about Canada, right? With all the sensationalism aside. But it does have a lot to do with our balance between interdependence and independence. And part of it is, our supportive capitalism, social safety net. People call it socialism, but it's it's not socialist compared to the systems in parts of Europe. It's like single payer. Our taxes are not that high except for, sales tax. People from America lose it when they see our sales taxes up here. But Europeans are like, hey, this isn't that bad. So this gives me, as somebody who's kind of weak on this stuff, even by Canadian standards. And I think it was because I grew up in such a multicultural neighborhood that I guess it just, my idea of peer group wasn't based on appearance. It wasn't really based on skin color because everybody looks so different from each other. I guess it was sort of socioeconomic class, but it's gotten worse than it was in terms of upward social mobility in Canada, but we don't have the garbage public schools that the US has. So, potential for upward social mobility is still possible in this country. So there wasn't even that. And so I look at this factional stuff that happens and it just baffles me. But when I apply this, self-construal theory and look at it in a lot of places, there is intense pressure to be part of the group, right? There is intense pressure to be interdependent. And this was something I had to work on personally. I had to recognize that you do need to be part of a team. It's what group work in school was supposed to teach you, but everybody's groaning at the term group work because everybody hates group work because it doesn't teach interdependence. It teaches you to hate interdependence. But, then there's the independent thing and not wanting to be arrogant. And I've sort of solved the problem with Generation X apathy. Just don't care. It worked for us. It worked for us in Gen X. It's not that we really didn't care. It's that we just sort of had this, everybody's saying everything's so bad. Okay, cool. Don't care. It was this performative apathy that I think kind of worked more than this you're all on the same team thing that happened with millennials. We Gen Xers kind of watched it happen. And then it was everybody felt unsafe when someone had an unpopular opinion and this, that, the next thing. And this is that interdependent self-construal that when someone disrupts the harmony of the collective, people feel unsafe because everything is so interdependent, right? Now, it's extremely important to be aware of the impact you have on other people, but not to the extent that you can't handle a novel or unpopular idea. And that's where we're at. And if it were just that simple, right? If it were just as simple as, okay, we are too interdependent. Our sense of self are too interdependent. Great. It would be much easier to solve the problem. The problem is, again, when you jump over to the independent self-construals model, we see that very judgy, very selfish, very what's in it for me, massive amounts of fundamental attribution error, massive amounts of being overly critical, not considering the broader context of something. We see a ton of that too. And that's why I started to think we just have too much identity. We, for some odd reason, have given people the impression that you have to fit in. If you're rejected by anybody, that's it. You're canceled. You're thrown out, right? But you also have to be a completely free thinker and your own person, and don't let anything bother you. And haters gonna hate. And when I say it that way, that actually is what people are told. You can't have it both ways. You can't be more open to other people and group opinions, but also go haters gonna hate. You can't have both at the same time. There needs to be a give and take, right? So we just have too much identity going on. Way too much identity. Way too much self-construal. Way too much thinking about and defining the self. And there's another interesting thing that went into this research that made me realize this might be some of the issue that I'm seeing in gaming right now, and all of this fear and terror and everything like that. There's this falsehood that women are more social than men when we get into gendered socialization. There is this falsehood. It's apparently not true, according to the research I read for this. Now, we do have that issue with, loneliness in older men. Hear me out. There might be an explanation for it. Apparently, earlier in life, there are different sorts of interdependence. Women approach interdependence differently than men do, and this is fascinating. Now, apparently, this is not a major difference. It's notable, but not a huge disparity. But women are more likely to place emphasis on close relationships. So, I'm this person's best friend, right? I'm this person's individual person connected to an individual person. That's what women tend to do. And they tend to have an emotional intensity or an emotional closeness one-on-one. They're also more willing to sacrifice for what they call a close other. So an individual. They're more likely to sacrifice for an individual as opposed to men. Men, they've found, identify the self with group memberships, have those emotionally intense experience in group contexts, and are more willing to sacrifice for groups. Now, whether this is the militarization of culture versus, the feminine associated with domesticity, with the home, who knows? Is this nature? Is this nurture? We don't know. This is just what's being observed. Now, the thing is, you can't maintain a friendship with a group. You can have an identity with a group. You can socialize with a group, but you don't have the connection with groups of people that you do, individual to individual. And, this might explain some of the stuff that's going on online. Granted, most social justice movements are that identity in the group, that sacrifice for the group, but that's not surprising because most public space performance, most public space interactions are masculinized. So, thing for another day. But so we have these people who want these intense one-on-one things, but are throwing themselves into group identity and sacrificing for group identity. You're seeing a ton of this with various movements nowadays. And so they don't have those strong individual to strong individual relationships, friendships, bonding, because then they're also doing the high independent self-control and being judgy face with everyone. And this sounds absurd. This sounds just like an excess of ego. But if you look at online, that's exactly what's happening. Our group is good. Your group is bad. Why? Because your group is made of bad people. Because you did bad things. And you did bad things because you're bad people. That's collective guilt and shame tactics mixed with a fundamental attribution error. Now, the nice thing about identifying this is it is something that, first of all, you can watch in yourself. But second of all, you can form groups and you can form friendships with individuals that moderate and control for both, right? If you're feeling intense shame or intense feelings of guilt, you may be too concerned about how other people see you. But if you're going around judging people all the time, you might use a little bit more interdependence. It's a balancing act, right? And that's where self-awareness comes in and empathy comes in. And, what they call emotional intelligence, but I'm becoming increasingly unfond of that word. Term, another thing for another day. But this is just intense identity-based introspection. And as much as self-actualizing is good and healthy, too much of anything is bad for you, including too much identity. So, and that's why, when you look at the gamer identity, and I think the intense reaction to the attacks on the gamer identity is so fluid that it allows for that wiggle room, right? Because, somebody who only plays Call of Duty and Madden, but plays every single day, or like Call of Duty and Destiny or something like that, but plays constantly, they're a gamer. Somebody like me who bops back and forth between indie and AAA, but mainly single player experience, I'm a gamer. And then people who tootle around and pretty much only play indie games, but they play a lot, they're also a gamer. But there's so much diversity in the experience of games. I think, gamers really react poorly to shame tactics. There is this raw response. But there's also this sort of, when gamers get into a gaming space where they feel comfortable and they feel like, they can relax, there's a lot of benefit of the doubt given. A lot of benefit of the doubt. Gamers really don't like very rigid rules and, one strike you're out style moderation. So it seems like this identity that's gotten a reputation for being like aggressive and toxic might actually be one of the healthy ones out there. I don't know. Discuss. Let me know what you think. What do you think about this theory? Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.